In this episode of the Joe Rogan Experience MMA show, Joe Rogan sits down with UFC middleweight fighter Jared Cannonier. The conversation covers a range of topics, including recent fights, weight cutting in MMA, the evolution of the sport, Cannonier's journey in MMA, and the personal development aspect of martial arts. The podcast begins with a discussion of recent fights, specifically the knockout victory of Justin Gaethje over Dustin Poirier. Cannonier and Rogan talk about the energy in the arena during fights and how it can affect the fighters. Cannonier shares his experience of fighting in different venues and how the crowd's reaction can impact his performance. The conversation then shifts to weight cutting in MMA and the dangers associated with it. Cannonier explains his own weight cutting process and how he approaches it in a healthy way. They also discuss the possibility of eliminating weight cutting altogether and having more weight classes in the sport. The discussion then moves to the evolution of MMA over the years. Cannonier reflects on the different generations of fighters and how the sport has progressed. They discuss the level of competition in organizations like Strikeforce and the importance of having a good coach and training environment. Cannonier shares his own journey in MMA, starting with his training in the Army Combatives program and eventually joining a gym in Alaska. He talks about his early days in the sport and how he transitioned from focusing on jiu-jitsu to incorporating striking into his training. He also mentions the challenges he faced as a new father and the adjustments he and his wife had to make to accommodate his training schedule. The conversation continues with a discussion of the personal development aspect of martial arts. Cannonier emphasizes the internal aspects of being a martial artist and how it has shaped him as a person. He talks about the discipline and dedication required to improve and evolve as a fighter. Cannonier goes on to discuss different training approaches in MMA. He explains that some fighters focus on strength and conditioning, while others prioritize fight-specific techniques. He mentions fighters like BJ Penn who emphasize conditioning and fighters like Georges St. Pierre who focus on technique. Rogan and Cannonier also talk about the importance of discipline in elite athletes. They mention fighters like Bernard Hopkins who maintained extreme discipline throughout their careers, which allowed them to compete at a high level even in their 40s and 50s. The conversation then shifts to Cannonier's training and recovery methods. He mentions using a cold plunge and ice baths for recovery, as well as stretching and massages. He also talks about the benefits of precise footwork and how he incorporates techniques from capoeira into his training. They also discuss recent fights in the UFC, including Terence Crawford's impressive performance against Errol Spence Jr. Cannonier praises Crawford's ability to adjust his tempo and land precise shots. They also mention upcoming fights, including Cannonier's interest in fighting the winner of the Sean Strickland vs. Uriah Hall fight. Cannonier shares his experiences living in Alaska and encountering bears in the wild. He talks about the primal energy and power of bears, particularly grizzly bears. He mentions the importance of being prepared and cautious when in bear territory. The conversation concludes with a discussion about the documentary film, Grizzly Man, which tells the story of a man who lived among grizzly bears and ultimately got killed by one. Cannonier describes the film as both tragic and comedic, highlighting the unique and sometimes bizarre relationship between humans and bears. Overall, the podcast covers a range of topics related to MMA training and technique. Cannonier provides insights into his own training methods and shares his experiences as a professional fighter. The conversation is informative and engaging, offering listeners a glimpse into the world of MMA. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe.